Should we do, because it is Good Friday, and I don't want to miss it, the Passion Recut. The Passion Recut is, well, the movie itself is actually 5 minutes shorter than the original version. Although I suspect that what's happened is that 6 minutes has come out, and there's a minute of pasting over the joins. And basically what they've done is Gibson said, and I believe that he's sincere, and I don't believe that Gibson's sincere about a lot of things, but I do think he's sincere about The Passion, whether you like it or hate it. A year after all the fuss has died down, you have to admit that he did stick his neck out. And I have things that I loved about the film and things that I hated about the film. I hated the politics of it. I do think it has a major problem in the way in which it portrays Caiaphas. And, but I was actually quite, thrilled is the wrong word, but quite, taken with the insane level of violence of the original. What they've done with this is they've basically taken out the impact shots. They've taken out the actual, flails hitting flesh, the stuff which really did make it a gore movie, which made it, Catholicism's answer to cannibal holocaust. I mean, that was what it was like in the 18 certificate version. They've turned it down to a 15 certificate version, but it's still substantially the very tough ride that it was before. And I think, oddly enough, and I know I'm going to regret saying this, I think it's a better film in this version. Partly because when you take away some of the hysteria, and not all of it, because it is still a hysterical movie, it is still a film which has a very particular sensibility that I am not of a piece with. When you reduce that hysteria slightly, you start to see the rest of the movie more. You start to see much more in the development of the characters. You start to see at least the attempts at some serious theology, although I don't think it is seriously theological. I think that, for example, the little moments that you get of the Sermon on the Mount, the small moments that you get of the Last Supper are not enough to counterbalance the onslaught of the journey from Gethsemane to Golgotha. But I think it is sincere. I think it is actually improved by having these cuts made to it. And if you were one of the people, and there were several, who didn't go and see The Passion because people like me said that it was the goriest film I'd ever seen, and I'm not saying this lightly, as you know, I mean, I do actually
love it.
Yeah,
you see more gore than anyone else.
Yeah, but also I take the issue of the film seriously, because I am very interested in filmic depictions of religion, and I do think that in the end he is sincere, and I think that if it enables some people to go and see it, although I know that it hasn't proved very popular, and that some people are seeing it as a completely an exercise in getting more money. Oddly enough, I think the film is improved by it because it allows a little more room for thought, and there is still the most beautiful moment in the film, which is if only the whole film had been like this, in which Mary is watching Jesus carrying the cross and he falls, and there's a flashback to her remembering him as a child falling, and it's heartbreaking. It's a beautiful moment, and it absolutely does that thing that I think the film should have done more of, which is the interaction between the spiritual and the human, the godly and the manly, and I think that there are flashes of it, but I think if it enables some people I'd still say, however, it's tough. I mean, even as a 15, it's a tough 15, and it's not to be taken lightly. And if you're not used to very oppressive, very, very in-your-face physical cinema, don't put yourself through it.
Looking at the TV schedules over Easter, it's quite clear that most people in television have decided just not to show any kind of religious movies at all.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, so The Robe and movie, and Jesus of Nazareth. I think Jesus of Nazareth is on BBC Three once. So is this the kind of film that will actually find its way onto a TV schedule happily, do you think?
Well, not happily. I mean, you're still talking well after The Watershed, because it's still, even for a 15 certificate, it's still very tough. I mean, it's still wincing, partly because it's been quite well edited. They've just literally taken out the impact shots, but you still get all the suffering. I mean, the flailing, the scourging seems to have gone down slightly, but it's still all there. It's still a very tough movie. In a way, like I said, it's just lost the slightly hysterical edge, and I imagine this will turn up on television, but I would think, you're still talking about well after The Watershed, even though it is, it's a serious religious movie. But as Christians will rightly think, this is not something that should be easily palatable. And boy, it isn't easily palatable. It is incredibly painfully, though.
And probably from what you're saying, and I could never sort of summon it up.
You haven't seen it yet.
I couldn't really sort of summon it all up to go and see it. Jesus of Montreal was still the most gruesome crucifixion prior to that. But,
yeah, probably. But
there's
it's an interesting. Sorry, I've just been handing it. It's an interesting thing in terms of, whether or not one should concentrate on the physical suffering or not. I mean, my big problem with Passion of the Christ, which is very simple, is the way that it's depicted in the Gibson movie. After the scourging and the flailing, there is simply no way that the man depicted could carry on. Gibson seems to think that his Jesus should have supernatural qualities. I'm from a different, Protestant tradition. I don't actually believe that that's the point. I think that the suffering as a man is the problem. And as soon as you get into the level of not believing the suffering anymore, the film loses some of its significance. Sorry to have gone off on that tangent.
But that's the whole point.
That is the problem, and that is my problem with it. Is it suffers from Mel Gibson hysteria.